Hey, Finu.
Hey, Kristen.
Well, welcome to the studio.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you for preaching that sermon. I think
sure.
all the work that you put in, all those quotes, all those stuff, thank you. You brought the gospel to our current context in just such a really practical, applicable way. So let's dive in. I have some questions for you.
Okay.
You ended off by saying we need to experience Jesus.
Yes.
So can you help us? What does it mean to experience Jesus? What does that actually look like? How does that look like for you?
Yeah, I think from my own experience, I guess that's probably the best way to describe it. Is I grew up in a Christian context, but I didn't really know Jesus personally. Like I didn't actually talk to him like I would talk to a friend. I didn't read the Bible. I mean, I read the Bible, I guess, because we were forced to read the Bible when we'd have family devotions, all this kind of stuff. But I never read the Bible and say, what is God actually speaking to me? Like, can God speak to me through the Word? And so I went through a season of my life in my mid to late teens when I went through sickness. I went through a lot of pain, a lot of loss. I've talked about this before. My brother's passing at the age of 12 was very pivotal for me because I began to say, well, if Jesus is really true, if he's alive, if he's real, how do I engage with him? How do I get to know him? And it's sort of the story that I shared at the end of my sermon, right? About the guy that was like, well, I'm going to give him 6 months. I'm going to give him a chance. And that was me. I was like, okay, I'm going to pray consistently. Like I'm going to read the Bible and ask you, Jesus, to speak to me. And that changed everything for me. And it wasn't like necessarily some kind of mystical experience. It was just following sort of these crumbs that God was leaving along the way that I could just read and understand and like, oh, I'm going to apply this here. I'm going to change this about me. And it wasn't me doing it. It was him working through me. And I remember people saying to me, you seem like a different person. And there's no formula to that. It's just, I'm just engaged, I'm open, I'm listening, and I'm wanting to learn and know who he is.
I think I'm trying to process because it's such an abstract term, experience. And I think drawing from what you're saying, it is the practical end of us actually reading the Bible, prayer. And then on the other end, it's God meeting us.
That's right.
And then in that experience, I guess that's more of a tangible expression of how we feel internally, but also how others are perceiving.
Yeah, I think it's the desire. It's the wanting to know him. It's the desire to want him to be a part of your life. And how he chooses to reveal himself, that's going to be different for every person. And that's the beauty of it, right? In the story that I shared about the Samaritan woman, she needed someone that would come to her at the well at noon.
Right.
That's what she needed. And so God comes to us in a way that makes sense for us. And that part is really hard to predict how that's going to work. But our part is to say, Lord, I'm intentionally wanting to know you. I'm reading your word. I'm reading the Bible saying, Jesus, please speak to me. That's the part we can do. And I think God always meets us. This is why we communicate the good news. That is the good news, that God wants to be imminent. He wants to enter into our world and transform us.
I love that. I think I heard one pastor say every morning he wakes up, he reads the Bible, and then he sits there for 15 minutes.
Yes.
And some days he says he feels like God really meets him there. And other days it doesn't feel like that at all. But it's a continual repetition. You said God is imminent. That's a theme that you hit on. Can you talk about that, how God enters into our world? And so if we're someone 9 to 5, we have a job, we get up, we go commute to work, we work, and then after work we're tired. What does it actually look like that God is entering into our space?
Yeah, I think, the big idea there is that, Jesus understands where the Samaritan woman in that story is at and wants to make a difference in her life practically, right? In her case, it was relationally. Go call your husband, and he gets into that, and she experiences transformation. I think what all of us, I'm a pastor, of course, so I have a specific kind of work that I do, but I'm also a citizen. I'm also a member of a community where I live. I'm also, a part of the, school where my daughter goes to school and part of the parents, the groups and what happens there. I am engaged in a real world that has real problems. So an example of this is a couple of years ago when COVID hit, we were in a specific community that had a really difficult time with people having access to fresh food. And through a couple of people that were Christians, but they were not working at a church, they had a desire to see us serve food, groceries, like fresh food, to families in a community. Long story short, today, I think they serve every week about 150 families in a community. with bags of groceries. And it was because people were just saying, how can I be Jesus to my neighborhood, to my community? And you find those ways to connect. And through that, and this wasn't the reason they did that, but through that, they've seen people come to know Jesus because they're like, who are you people? Like, why are you doing this? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Why do you care so much? I think that's what mission is about. Mission isn't about like just telling people, Jesus loves you, you need to give your life to Jesus. Of course, that's part of the story of the gospel, of course, but it's being incarnational and just entering into people's circumstances, caring enough and saying, Jesus, help me serve.
I like that. So I think what I'm hearing, like we experience God as imminent, where He enters into our world. We experience His love and His grace and everything that is good, His mercy, and then in that, it's us pouring into others, into the relationships around us, which also speaks into. You talked about loneliness.
Yeah.
And you listed all the stats that I think many of us are feeling, just this epidemic of loneliness. Can you talk, like, as a pastor, what does that look like, and what do you envision for the church? Do you talk about a safe space where people can actually enter into? What does that look like for us as a church, even Village Church, to live that out?
Yeah, I think obviously this is something we're dealing with a lot in our culture right now, coming out of COVID, coming out of a couple of years of being isolated and all of that. And it's been hard for people to re-engage in relationships. And so when I say a space, the way I look at it is not like a facility, not a building per se. It's people, right? It's how do we make room for people to be who they are, to allow them to be authentic about what's going on internally. A lot of the stats right now that talk about young people are that the idea of finding a place, a space, a people that they can be authentic with is really risky because they're really worried about being rejected. And of course, social media doesn't help, right? Because it's like everything you post has filters. So it's like you're showing the best version of yourself to the world constantly. So you're not sure if you can show people your flaws, show people your weakness, your brokenness. And I think what it means for Christ followers is that we do what Jesus did. Like, He was a safe space for this woman who could talk to Him about everything that was happening in her life. And so I don't think it's about the answers we provide. It's about the room we provide for people to ask the questions. Because ultimately, Kristen, like we don't offer the answers. Like, it isn't the church that offers the answers
We
for
don't
people,
know the
right?
answers.
It's Jesus that does that, right? And because the reason I say that is people don't engage because like, I don't have the answers. What if they ask me a question I don't know the answer to? It's like, well, the Lord can figure that out for you. What you need to do is create an environment where people in your life, again, not just in church, but at work, in your community, in your neighborhood, people can authentically communicate to you what's going on in their lives. And you can pray and say, Jesus, help me. Help me bring comfort, help me bring peace, help me bring a word that sort of is encouraging to them in whatever is happening in their life.
I love that. I think that's such a good challenge for us. Like, we use all these fancy terms, like when you're preaching and whatnot, like God is imminent. Like, what does that even mean? And like the vulnerability and the authenticity of like, I don't actually know, but let's figure it out together. Like, and let's be vulnerable. And, the lady you're talking about who had 5 husbands or whatever, like just being where we're at, we can be the community that God has commissioned us to be, to love others, to be authentic and welcome each other in and not judge, like what you're saying, like the world, we feel that. Thank you. Thank you. That was so good. If you want more, please check out workshop.online. We can dive in deep together on all these fancy terms that Finu's talking about. Workshop.online. And we have one more week left of Essentials, so make sure you join us next week. Thank you. Also, thank you, because you make this happen. And so with your generosity and giving, we make the mission of Village Church to see people transformed into fully devoted followers of Jesus. And if you want to give as well, you can at thisisvillagechurch.com/give. or text Village Church to 77977. With all that, we will see you next time.